Testing, testing, one, two, three, testing, one, two, three, testing.
Doing?
Just doing stuff on the computer. Okay. All right. Hello, and welcome to the Sonic Cinema movie chat. Welcome back. It's been several months, and I will kind of explain why here as we go along. And my name is Brian Scuttle. I'm the proprietor of www.sonic-cinema.com. If you're not familiar, I am a film critic, podcaster, and composer. And I am here to kind of get this back up and running and just kind of explain what's been going on the past few months because of the fact that it's been a bit arduous to be perfectly honest. And there's a reason it's been a while since I have been on here. So I wanted to go through that. Sorry, let me bring this up here. All right. Okay, so thank you very much for being with us today. If you are checking it out, I apologize for the mess back there. It's been a process going through the stuff at mom's house, and it's honestly kind of intimidating. If you're not aware, my mother went to assisted living and memory care last year because of Alzheimer's and dementia, and so it's been tough getting into the habit of going through all that stuff, and it's been pretty intimidating because it's like, well, what do I do with all that? And if you've been through that experience, you can no doubt understand where I'm coming from with that. Uh, so the first thing I wanted to give you a heads up about is just sort of where has the movie chat been for 6 months, and quite honestly, it's been dormant because I really have not had time to stream. Um, my current job, other than film criticism, require is I've basically worked nights, so it's 5 nights a week, and then the 2 nights I do have off, I either have screenings or I'm wanting to spend time with my wife, and I so I haven't really been up on the chat the way that I would normally like. And it's good because of the fact that it's given me a lot of chances to get stuff done. It's given me a lot of chances to just spend time with her and friends in general. But I want to get back into it, and hopefully, if I do find another job here in the near future, I'll be able to. Uh, Basically, what's basically the reason I am doing this tonight is because I happen to have tonight off work. It's a rare Friday night for me to have off. So I'm excited about that. And I thought, you know what? It's probably time to get back on the stream and to get people caught back up on what exactly is going on with me. And quite a bit, actually. Sonic Cinema is going very well. And if hopefully you've been paying attention to the site, we've been keeping up with reviews pretty consistently there. Not so much as far as big blogs. I think the most recent one I did in September about when I was hospitalized in 2007, and just sort of how movies treat people going through rehabilitation and mental rehabilitation as much as physical. The podcast is going very well. I've said before, I think this might be my favorite run of the podcast that we've had to date. The last episode was myself and Robert Yanis of Close Watch and Franchise Detours talking about the score for Cloud Atlas. It was a companion podcast to an episode on the film Cloud Atlas that we did for his Close Watch podcast. If you haven't had a chance to listen to those, I cannot recommend them enough. In October, we talked about horror. Started with Dr. Becky O'Brien, a musicologist, and I discussing horror soundtracks. And then I had Scott Weinberg of 80s All Over and Now the Overhated podcast about Session 9, Frailty, and May. And then I had Phil Faso on. We talked about 1982 horror movies. So that was a lot of fun. And then this year's just been really strong. I've really enjoyed the conversations, and I think we're gonna end on a pretty high note. We have another episode of Established Classics with Tim Cox coming up later this month, and then I'm hoping to do a podcast about Steven Spielberg with Darren Lundberg and Danielle Saltzman, whom have both been on the podcast this year. And then I'm hoping to do episodes on adaptation and A Few Good Men to close out the year. One of the things I really am quite pleased with in terms of how I've been able to schedule guests is I feel like this year, as much as any year, has been really great in terms of getting people on the podcast talking about things that they love. And that's something that was really important for me. That's something that's always really important for me. But there are times where, you kind of feel like maybe you're just trying to do a particular subject, trying to find the right fit. I feel like I've found the right fits a lot this year, and then being able to talk with the CEO of Film Detective earlier this year, talking to Christian Taftrup from Speak No Evil, talking to Nathan Halpern about his scores he had at Sundance. The couple of times I've had Danielle on already, the one time I had Darren on talking about Hans Zimmer, when I brought Morgan and Chelsea back on to discuss MGM, and it's just been a really great run of episodes this year. And I hope to carry that into 2023. It's one of those things where I still feel like I still have a backlog of guests that I want to have on, and I want to have people returning, but I also don't want to overwhelm myself because I do have a full-time job. I do have other responsibilities away from Sonic Cinema. So it's hard to really do, like, I can't do an episode a week. That's just not feasible for me with my schedule. Doing Class of 1999 basically killed me. It was completely overwhelming for a wide variety of reasons. And so that's what's going on with the podcast. And then also, I've been promoting it for the past couple of weeks, but I didn't hadn't talked about it on here before the movie chat went away, and that is the fact that I had the opportunity to score my first feature film for Player PhD, and I it's a film directed by Brian Ackley, who's been on the podcast before, who's a filmmaker that I've covered before. I've reviewed Uptown, Alienated, um, 2050. I can't remember the other one they did. How come I can't remember the other? He did. I've reviewed all of his work, all of his feature work, and he asked me in September, or no, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. He asked me in uh, February if I would be interested in scoring his next feature, which would be a romantic comedy. And I was very pleasantly surprised. I was honored to have the to be asked because of the fact that I never scored a feature film before, and it's been about 13 years since I've actually done a score for somebody else, um, with Walpurgis Night. So I eventually said yes, and I like the idea of the challenge of doing a romantic comedy. Um, the process was pretty chaotic. I actually wrote about it on Sonic Cinema, and you can find that blog on the under the music heading on the news page. And I think, as well as the pre-order for the album, which comes out this coming Tuesday. I am extremely, the more I've listened to it, especially, the more I've been extremely pleased with with how this turned out. I think it turned out extremely well, and I do want to, while I have you here, I want to share the teaser, which is up on my composer page, and it features some of my original music, and I want to go ahead and share that with you. So just a minute. That is the teaser for Player PhD. So the context for the one line of dialogue that is mentioned in there, it does a pretty great job of highlighting the story of Player PhD. But I do want to mention, as far as the in terms of the one line of dialogue that you hear. So basically, the film is actually coming out in two versions. Is largely Haitian cast and crew, and so the film will be released in Creole language as well as English. And I was brought in to write the music for the English version. Um, Although some of it might end up in the Creole version as well. But so that's what makes that live dialogue that you hear in the film so interesting. And I think it's a lovely film. It really fits in nicely with the larger arc of Brian Ackley's work, and I'm a big fan of his work. If you haven't checked out Uptown, Alienated, any of his other stuff, I highly recommend it. Be sure to pick up a DVD of 2050, which has my commentary on it, and I absolutely am completely proud of this music, and I love the more I've listened to this music, the more I really see how it fits in to the larger trajectory of my career as a composer. And it's available on for pre-order on Bandcamp. If you if you use the promo code New Beginnings, you will get 15% off your order, and that's not just for Player PhD. That's for if you decide to get any of the albums or EPs that I have on Bandcamp. And all my albums and EPs are officially on there now. I wanted to make I wanted to make a point of having that be the case when Player PhD the score came out. The movie itself comes out. I know they're aiming for December, but it was very important for me to have the score released this month. So Brian's been very generous in allowing me to not only release the score ahead of time, but also to um, share the trailer. The teaser you just saw can actually be seen on my Composer YouTube channel. And if you want to hear Brian and I talk, he's been on a couple episodes of the Sonic Cinema podcast. He and Prince and Holt were actually my first non-friend guests on the podcast. Um, it were By which I mean my first filmmaker guests. I mean, because I do consider both of them friends. And we when we were talking about Alienated, then they were on again together when we talked about 2050. Brian has also we talked about Bringing Out the Dead and Payback in the Class of 1999 series. I feel like there's one more, but it might have just been those two. But I hope you check out the film. I hope you check out the score. This score really was a labor of love. I mean, I really came to love this experience as well as the music and the film in general. And so I hope people give the film a chance. It's gonna be streaming, but at the site on the end of the teaser, and you can go to Bandcamp to purchase the score. So that's probably one of the more exciting things that have had happen this year. And that was well, it's probably the most exciting thing I've had happen this year in a positive manner because it's been kind of a rough year, admittedly. It's been a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, in regards to work and regards to personal things. but at the same time, I still really am. I'm very blessed to have the people in my life, the movies, the movie experiences I have in my life, to and the opportunity to do something like film music. I'm also becoming a more regular contr contributor to In Their Own League, which is it is a website devoted to focusing on issues and films from female filmmakers as well as people of color. And I've contributed a little bit, a piece or two here or there since July, uh, starting with a piece on Natalie Holt and her score on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Talks about Jennifer Connelly and the impact I think she has on movies. Talks about Lady Beware, the Diane Lane movie that's always been a favorite of mine. I contributed to a podcast on favorites, scary movie soundtracks. And then this month, I already have written on Dorothy Malone and the Big Sleep. And I will have something later this month on, or going into December, on Steven Spielberg Mothers, in Steven Spielberg's films, basically inspired by The Fablemans coming out, which I'm finally going to get to see on Monday. And I cannot wait to see that. I am one of the things that you've probably noticed a lot this year is that I in the past couple of years really one of the things I've tried to do with Sonic Sim, I haven't wanted to focus solely on the bigger films. I do think there's a place for smaller films that people are not necessarily as aware of as like Black Panther or Tar or um Causeway, and I'm really trying to get back into screeners that people have sent me over the years. Filmmakers like Chris Esper and David Spaltro and even Brian Ackling, Princeton Holt. The only reason I know those filmmakers is because they sent me their work and I was interested in following it. I am trying to get back into that. It's been a struggle to do that because I've devoted so much more time to studio screeners. But I am going to be working diligently on getting some of those other screeners uh, watched and reviewed because that is important to me. It's an important part of the process to me. Um, Recently, I saw a documentary, and it will come out and my review will come out in December when the movie comes out. It's called Boy Scouts Honor, and it's about survivors of sexual abuse while during their time in Boy Scouts of America. And as you know, I if as you may know, I am an Eagle Scout. I was in Boy Scouts. I was very fortunate. I didn't have to deal with that. Um, I've had a, but despite that, I've still had a love hate relationship with the organization over the years because of not only the ways that they've uh, covered up abuses, but also the ways that they basically have let religious organizations dictate more in terms of their policy on homosexuality. And the this I we're, I recognize that the organization as it is now is not the same organization as 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. But it's hard to watch something like Boy Scouts Life and see just how recent some of these issues were and not be taken aback by it. And I'm going to talk about that more later when my review for the film comes out in December. I'm hoping to talk to the filmmaker as well as one of the subjects of the film. And I want to do that as a podcast. And I might do that as a podcast if I get those opportunities. Um, and you can definitely check that out on the podcast if it does happen. I love something like that. It's not going to get the same response as something like She Said, which I got a chance to see on Tuesday, and it's a very good film. It's about how the Harvey Weinstein story broke, and essentially the Me Too movement as we know it came into being. And that's, it's weird because of the fact that is a movie that really does ask you to wrestle with a lot of difficult questions when it comes to how much you can keep supporting people who've been outed as abusers. Harvey Weinstein, like, he wasn't necessarily the driving force behind a lot of the movies that he's made, whether it's for Quentin Tarantino, Shakespeare in Love, The English Patient, Good Will Hunting. But I mean, the people who made those films, you feel like they had to know something was going on with how pervasive it was, his behavior was. And so, and I write in my review, there's a certain amount of irony that Brad Pitt is a producer because of the fact that what we're finding out about Brad Pitt, especially with regards to Jennifer Aniston and Angelina Jolie, is pretty horrifying. But him being a producer, it's like, does that, I don't think that diminishes the film at all, because ultimately it's the work of the writer, the director, the actors, who all do a tremendous job. Brad Pitt's just one of the people who's producing it, is behind the film getting made financially. And it's one of those things where it's you kind of have to really think about it in terms of where do you want to stand in terms of how you look at art or certain organizations. And I think it's a tough question, but I think it's an important question, whether you're talking about Hollywood, whether you're talking about Boy Scouts. I think it's something that's worth considering if it's something that means something to you. I wrote a few years ago on how I am approaching the whole idea of Me Too with regards to how I react to certain filmmakers and certain actors after they have been outed. With Harvey Weinstein, I can kind of separate my appreciation of the films that I love of his that he produced from the man, because of the fact that he ultimately was not the creative driving force of it. He was one of the money men behind it, and he certainly, I'm sure, he brought ideas to the table, but ultimately it's the work of the filmmakers. But what do you do when you're talking about an actor whom you've had a great deal of affection for, and what happens when they're getting when they have issues being brought up with regards to that, whether it's sexual harassment, sexual assault, or something like anti-Semitism or homophobia or transphobia. It's, I mean, you certainly want to be an ally to the friends of yours whom that impacts. But, if they were a favor of yours, it's going to be hard to get through past that. And the one that I've had the most struggle with to a certain extent is Mel Gibson, who, my mother absolutely loved back in the 90s. She was a huge fan of his, and we got a lot of his movies over the years. And the fact of the matter is, I still look at him as a very good director, very good actor. Um, but I don't really feel the need to watch any of his new stuff. I watched one of them earlier this year, Panama, just because of the fact that I was curious, and I decided not to. I decided it's just not a good movie. It's not an interesting movie. Uh, how does that impact my viewing of Braveheart, which is a movie that I unabashedly love and is important to me because of the fact that it is one that it inspired. James Horner's score for that movie inspired my desire to write film music. And so what do you do with that? How do you unpack that? Can you let go of that? Or because I still love the movie. I still think it's a terrific movie. I still think it's an entertaining movie. But, can you separate the man who made it from your feelings for the film? And that's especially with somebody who's as in depth involved with that film as Gibson is. It's harder to do. But there are certainly some films where it's easy for me to sort of step away from that movie. I have no interest in anything he does now. Like I Panama didn't really give me an appetite to go check out what Mel Gibson's doing now. If he were to never work again, whether as a filmmaker or actor, I would be comfortable with that. I don't feel the need to watch anything new that he does. When he makes something as a director, that might change because I still think he's a terrific director. But like, I haven't seen Father Stew. I haven't seen some of his other high-profile movies in the past couple of years. I'm not really interested in it. So that's kind of how I feel about him, and that does. So I brought up Gibson in particular because of the fact that what I want to do is I want to talk about something that I started doing for Patreon earlier this year, back in August. I actually had the idea going into the new year. That is something I wanted to do. As I started to go through mom's stuff, I really wanted to. I It really made me feel like I need to start going through more and more of my movie collection and what's important to me to hold on to. And so, because of that, I wanted to do uh, a series for Patreon subscribers. It's called Leaving the Collection. And the whole idea behind it is I watch a movie that I've had in my collection for many years that I might not have an interest in watching anymore. And I haven't watched in a while and I don't really feel the need that I really don't feel like it belongs in my collection anymore. So I watch the disc one more time and then I do a quick take review that's exclusively for Patreons, where I talk about what inspired it to done, get the film in particular, uh, what I think about the film, and why it's leaving the collection. And so, with that being said, so I started in August. I've tried to do 2 a month, and this is actually going to be the first one. And I wanted to do something special for this live stream, and I wanted to do kind of a live episode what you can expect from leaving the collection. The Patreon is in the Patreon is patreon.com/SonicCinema. But so my latest episode of leaving the collection is for a movie that Mel Gibson did in 2000. It is Wim Wenders' The $1 Million Hotel. Anybody remember this one? I would be willing to bet no, because it basically made no dent whatsoever financially, and it's honestly an awful movie. I got it because of the fact that I blind bought it because at the time Mom was still interested in Mel Gibson as a filmmaker and as an actor, and so it's like, oh hey, I haven't seen this, and I saw Wings of Desire. I really like that. I'd seen a couple of Wim Wenders films by that point, so I was curious. I'd also bought the soundtrack that came out long before the film did. The soundtrack, which has U2, Bono, Brian Eno, tremendous. Absolutely love the soundtrack. Great soundtrack. Probably the best soundtrack to a piece of shit movie I've ever seen. I still listen to that soundtrack, and I love it. It's awesome to listen to. So the reason I bought this film was simply because of the fact that as a Mel Gibson fan at the time, I wanted to watch it. And I had been listening to the soundtrack over the, I don't know, a few months or so before it came out on DVD. So I bought it, and my mom and I watched it, and we hated it. It was terrible. So it's the story of this rundown hotel in LA, the $1 Million Hotel. And basically it is solving a murder or the death of a billionaire's son, played by Tim Roth. The main characters are Tom Tom, played by Jeremy Davies, Eloise, who is Mila Jovovich, and Special Agent Skinner, FBI Special Agent Skinner, played by Mel Gibson. And Icon Productions produced it. So it's an Icon production. So that's kind of how Mel Gibson got in on it. And it's such a turgid and really boring movie. It's not interesting enough in the mystery to be compelling. And it's not in the main romance between Tom Tom and Eloise is not interesting. Everybody's kind of crazy in the movie. And I kind of feel like the script by Bono and Wenders is trying to say something about forgotten people, homeless people, people who are really on kind of the outskirts of society that the system exploits and abuses. And I can kind of see that here on my last rewatch, but I just don't think it works because the characters are not interesting. The characters are really archetypes that are built out of tics and cliches. They're not interesting to watch. And so it's one of those things where when you have that type of movie, I kind of see where Mel Gibson was coming from when he was when he said in an interview that was boring as hell. Uh, Now he later walked back and said it was at the end of a long day. But I truly believe he probably felt that way watching it, because I feel that way watching it. It's, and it's stunning because I can watch the 4.5 hour version of Until the End of the World by Vendors. I'm captivated. I can't By the end of the first hour in $1 Million Hotel, I'm just checked out. By far the most interesting thing about $1 Million Hotel is the soundtrack, which I think gets to the ideas that the movie is trying to impart, or I think the movie is trying to impart, better than the movie does. It's kind of noirish, but it's basically I, I I like the idea of it, but it ultimately doesn't work. I don't think there's a single performance in here that is interesting, that is among the strongest work anybody's done. And I just don't think there's anything there. So that's the reason it's leaving. And also it's going back to Gibson. It's This year's been a lot of really looking at some Gibson films and trying to see what I what I think on some of them, and whether I want to keep them, whether I don't, and whether they still have a hold on me. $1 Million Baby, I figured $1 Million Hotel, or I should say, I figured I would not have any affection and be fine getting rid of. I have the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack. Again, I think the soundtrack says everything the movie's trying to say better. But so I have no problem getting parting with it. And plus it's it's Noirvember, so I wanted to do something kind of noir, and it kind of fits that bill. Doesn't really go overtly into film noir, but it's kind of in that same vein. uh it's just a very dull movie, and it's really disappointing coming from Vendors. um so that is my take on the $1 Million Hotel. And that's the type of thing that I do with leaving the collection. And I think that I think the way that this type of series works is you're basically looking to see the type of person you were when you bought a movie versus the type of person you are now when you're trying to say goodbye to the movie. It's funny because there was one movie in October that I was going to do for this series that I ended up not doing, and that was Scout's Guide to Zombie Apocalypse. I was like, I'm not sure if I really like that. And then I rewatched it, and it's like, oh hey, I really like it. So it's not quite its time yet, but for the most part, I'm picking movies that either I haven't seen since I bought them on DVD, or I haven't seen them in a long time. $1 Million Hotel is one of those ones that I haven't seen in a long time, and I don't mind saying goodbye to it because I think it's honestly pretty terrible. Uh, so I think that's all that I have for this episode of the Sonic Cinema Movie Chat. Thank you very much if you've come on the stream. I appreciate it. I hope I will get a chance to do this more regularly. Um, we'll just see what the new year brings. And I appreciate you if you've been reading Sonic Cinema, if you've been listening to the podcast, if you've been following me as I've guested on other podcasts. I hope that you've gotten something out of it, continue to get something out of it, and I hope you stick with me throughout this. It's I love doing this. I love talking about movies, and it's always a pleasure. So patreon.com/Sonic Cinema, Bandcamp www.brentscuttle.com. And for my music, as well as www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much for joining me for this episode of the movie. Or if you're watching this afterwards, I hope you stick with me. Hopefully, I will get something up earlier than 6 months later in the future. But that's it for me this time. And thank you very much.